Hello, hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And Phil, can I give you my first and honest reaction to recording this episode?
Go.
That was it. Oh, I did it before you said go. Hold on, I'll do it again. Do you know what that is? It's
a sigh of relief.
It is
that we have good things to break down.
It's a sigh of relief. Yes, we made it. We made it. The UFC.
But we have too many things to break down.
Well, it's true. We have a surfeit of breakdowns to give. We're not going to be able to break them all down, to be honest. Last weekend we're just going to pretend that UFC card never happened. If that works for you. I'm happy never talking about it again.
I mean, how many of those fights could not have been effectively predicted at the get-go? Not very many of them.
Yeah, you say that.
Not many of the relevant ones.
I think I actually did a terrible job predicting that card, but who cares?
I said the relevant ones.
Yeah. Davis Romero, though, happened last weekend. Coming up this next weekend, as you had to remind me, Phil, is Usyk versus Joshua. Really exciting heavyweight boxing match. And I think we're going to have to really wait till next week and do a recap to discuss that one, because the bulk of our time today is going to be spent breaking down those few UFC, well, I don't know why I said those few, basically as many UFC 266 fights as we can, because this is the era of the UFC treating every non-pay-per-view card as a sort of contract obligation, where they just are like, oh my God, what fights can we even put together? And then they save all the good ones, that mean anything or are exciting to fans just hearing the two names. They save all those for the pay-per-view. And such is the case for this card. Ironically, the one that we discussed in advance, and if you haven't heard our breakdown of Haqparast Hooker, you can hear that in the segment 3 of last week's episode, may not be happening. Because Dan Hooker was like having huge difficulty getting his visa, and then he got it. Largely, it seems, thanks to pressure put on the commissions, or who the fuck is in charge of visas? The ambassador, by people on social media. And now Nasrat Haqparast has revealed that he may not be able to get his visa. So that fight is still in limbo, but still on the card. We've got very exciting Alexander Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega. Fascinating matchup. Not easy to break down. We're going to do our best. Valentina Shevchenko versus Lauren Murphy. Despicable. Much easier to break down. I'm going to do my worst, just out of spite. Nick Diaz coming back after like 10 years on the sidelines to fight Robbie Lawler, which is interesting in a very strange way. And more besides. So, yeah, there's too much to talk about. But we're gonna stick mostly to the Volkanovski Ortega fight for this segment, I think, and I think we'll have plenty to say. Why don't you give me Phil, so I can rest my throat? Give me your general assessment of this fight.
So this is, I think, one which seems it's a really interesting fight in that Ortega's most effective performance and most kind of strategically and technically defined performance also in some ways goes against the effective tools and approach that you might necessarily think that he would need to win a fight with Alexander Volkanovski. Because the last time Brian Ortega fought, I was kind of shitting on him a bit. And incorrectly, as you sort of pointed out to me, that he was going to lose to Korean Zombie because he just wasn't as good as him. He wasn't as good a counterpuncher. He was too easy to hit and all this other kind of stuff. And, you sort of brought me back a bit to say that, he's been developing incredibly quickly. We should expect good things from him. And you were 100% right, even if you didn't actually pick him.
No, but, I didn't realize how correct I was, to the point that I ended up being wrong. No one saw him getting better in those particular ways that dramatically, I don't think. It seemed in many ways like a sort of controlled outfighting performance against Chan Sung-jung. I think one which was more than a little facilitated by Zombie's love for eating weird, changing elbows. But yeah, definitely one which showed a disciplined, focused Brian Ortega. Yep.
The question is, would this work against Alexander Volkanovski? I think the answer is probably no. Just as a straight up analysis, I just think the answer is just no. Because one of the main things that jumped
right back after this break. There's the prediction. It's that simple, Phil? I don't think it's that simple.
But one of the things about the Ortega Zombie fight which jumps out is that they're both quite slow men. And this really informed, I think, fights like Holloway versus Cater or Ortega himself. Because it just meant that Holloway was just able to build angles on both of those fighters and just snowball his success into more success until he was just absolutely horrifyingly fucking them up.
Right. So you're posing the question, how much can Volkanovski make Ortega look like, say, Mizuto Hirota?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main question is, can Volkanovski just use his feints and his entries to build attacks on a relatively slower opponent? And I think the answer is probably pretty well. I think if you look at his general approach against Holloway, it was feinting, hand fights, and low kicks and counterpunching, largely focused on taking away, go back to one of our bugbears, the initial node of Holloway's offense. Mm-hmm. Holloway isn't a rear hand fighter, he's a jabber, and Volkanovski entirely focused his game pretty much on stripping away Max Holloway's jab. And I think he can 100% do that to Brian Ortega.
Yeah.
Does the way Brian Ortega fought against Chan Sung-jung make you confident that he's going to be super good at countering low kicks?
No. Go on, yeah.
But he's going to be better at hand fighting and jabbing with Volkanovski than Holloway was? No.
He's famously worse at hand fighting than Max Holloway, to the point that Max Holloway was.
The GIF has shown us this.
Yes. Max Holloway putting Brian Ortega's hands in better defensive positions and then hitting him anyway. Yeah, I think, I see what you're saying. I think it's a great point, and it could potentially be way more effective, because this is something that stood out to me, my most recent review of Ortega versus Jung, is it's a very one strike at a time fight. Mm-hmm. Brian Ortega shows a fantastic jab, certainly better than any jab we've seen from him in the past, but very rarely does anything else come off of it. It usually sets up footwork. He did a fantastic job, again, I don't want to undersell this, of using his jab to prevent the Korean Zombie from cutting him off. It was a really great escape tool. It enforced the distance, and that is something we're going to talk about here, against Volkanovski, who is, it has to be said, a tiny man. 700 pounds, as we all know, but very short. But there, very little other offense came off that jab. There weren't a lot of 1-2s, from Ortega. There weren't a lot of jabs into left hooks. He and Korean Zombie both did a thing that, they did what I would call intermediate trap setting, where they were watching the opponent's hands and posture and trying to build off of their attacks And Ortega had a lot to build off of. Lots of jabs, tons of feints. In particular, his feints for like the single leg were super effective. I'm curious to see how that works out here. But they would do a thing like hooking off the jab is the classic example. They would show the feint, they'd get the person reaching and be like, okay, the hook is there. And then they'd throw the hook and the opponent would, frequently avoid it. And then nothing else would come after it. Which, like, if you're a master of striking, not intermediate, that is where you do your damage, right? You spring the trap, and then in that moment when your opponent has devoted all of their defensive energy and their mental powers to evading the trap that's just been sprung, you hit them again. That is like the place where combinations flourish, is when you make the opponent react in a big way to the initial strike. And it works even better if that initial strike was itself part of a confusing pattern. So that they're really having to focus reactively on what you're doing, and that means you can predict their reactions and catch them with further strikes. Ortega didn't do any of that. I mean, very little. It was mostly using the jab to maintain distance and get himself off the fence. Alexander Volkanovski, pretty good at adding layers to exchanges in weird ways. Like, anyway, go on. You were saying about, I want to extend this discussion before I just lay out all my points at the top.
Yeah. He's someone who I think, like, just to add on to your point, yeah, he's fantastic at that kind of thing. Again, he's not the kind of person like a Holloway where he's going to snowball from a single small opportunity. He's not going to carry on like sticking the crowbar into the crack and just levering it open until the opponent falls to pieces. But he is someone who will constantly build in short bursts.
Yeah.
He will have something where he will just hand fight, low kick, hand fight, low kick. Hand fight, feint low kick. Instead, he will shift into a right hand.
Yeah.
Then next time he will shift and he will feint the right hand. He will come back with a left hook, and his defense stays pretty good throughout all this stuff. Like, he builds instead of building like linearly on and on and on like Max Holloway does. He just builds a little more every time.
Yeah. More skirmishes.
A little differently every time.
More skirmishes than like a constantly building assault. But at a certain point, you're being harried from every direction, and you don't know what to do. And Volkanovski definitely has a habit of shutting people down progressively over the course of a fight without really having to just, as you said, like Holloway, pile on offense after offense.
Yeah, they're just like, every time I try and engage with this guy, it doesn't go my way.
Yeah. So what we're sort of suggesting here, that works for Volkanovski is a fight where he pressures Ortega, and gets past his reach and, adds layers in the pocket. And I think in the first two rounds, of Ortega versus Chan Sung Jung, both of which were more competitive than I remembered. Like, it really does feel in that fight that the big spinning elbow in round 2 sort of broke Korean Zombie mentally.
Oh yeah, he looks completely unconscious for the remainder of the round after it connects.
Yeah,
he's just staring at nothing.
Yeah,
and then
it may not just be an airy sort of
way worse for the rest of the fight.
It may not just be the sort of airy metaphysical type of mental break either. His brain may have been seriously compromised for the last 3 rounds of that fight, and
he's gone on record as saying that he doesn't remember any of them at all.
Yeah, I believe that. And what happens up to that point, though, which is fairly competitive, are a couple of instances where Korean Zombie is just getting Ortega to the fence and then adding a couple layers. He's throwing combinations, and this is before the fight becomes mostly just both guys trying single shots with Ortega coming out on top. And they work, those layers. So there's reason, I think, to believe that Volkanovski, who is faster and just a better a better fighter at going deeper into exchanges could have real success there. What's interesting is that Brian Ortega is maybe the first guy, assuming we see the same kind of boxing game we saw against Korean Zombie, kind of the first opponent of his kind to fight Volkanovski, which is to say a long, tall fighter who is going to try to keep the tiny little stocky Volkanovski at range. Max,
more than this,
yeah.
He's a long, tall fighter whose absolute speciality. I mean, this is why the zombie fight was in some ways like a mirror match. He's a long, tall fighter whose speciality is walloping level-changing short guys.
And
if you look at, say, Holloway's fight with Edgar, and then Ortega's fight with Edgar,
right?
You're like, you can see, like, Holloway broadly tries to fight the same fight he does against everyone in a kind of slightly more, what's the right word? Conserved way that he normally would.
Yeah.
He's constantly worried about the level change, and honestly, this should have given us a bit more of a notice of the fact that he might be in more trouble against Volkanovski than we thought.
Sure.
But then, Ortega just waits for Edgar to change levels and then just instantly wipes him out. That's he's one of these guys where tons of his tools are just made to beat up on short guys who are coming in on him. He's a snap down and headlock guy. He's choke specialist. He's an uppercut guy. He's a step-knee guy.
And I would also add
very, very dangerous.
I would also add the short cracking elbows. If you're a short guy just coming in with your head at his chest level, he will just shiver you with a forearm and let you run right into it. And from Holloway himself, we saw that those tactics can be really effective against Volkanovski, because those are many of the same ideas he brought, the new ideas he brought to the Volkanovski rematch. Keying in on that second layer of Volkanovski's attack. And that's really what it was. Volkanovski is not, despite his speed, he's not like a Chad Mendez kind of counterpuncher or like a Tyron Woodley kind of counterpuncher. He's a great counterpuncher in the second layer. You throw out the jab and he will duck it and then come back with a 2-3 or a 3-2 or whatever. Or sometimes just fire out with a jab and break your rhythm. He throws a jab and then steps in hard behind it, often ducking, and then fires a combination. All of this effective work happens after this like deep, confusing layer of jabs and feints and footwork and defense that Volkanovski has used to shut so many fighters down. But when Holloway keyed in on, I can ignore Volkanovski's jab and then punish him for whatever move he makes after it, which is more often than not a shift into range or a duck or both, he did so with uppercuts and knees, and they were very effective. They really, really worked early. He dropped Volkanovski twice in the early going of the fight, and the better of those two knockdowns was off an uppercut. And he continued to land that uppercut. So Brian Ortega keeping Volkanovski at bay in a more determined way, and perhaps therefore forcing him to more aggressively cover the distance by ducking his head and barreling forward, there could be a lot of opportunity for uppercuts and knees and short elbows to land.
Yeah, and it's just the fact that Ortega is a big opportunist. He's not really someone who's traditionally been, as we said, he's not traditionally been a big jab guy, whereas that really is like the crux of Holloway's game.
Yeah.
The fact that Volkanovski was able to so consistently take it away from him made Holloway really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think Ortega just has, much, much less chance of surviving again, I could be wrong here, have been before, but I think he has much less chance of surviving just a neutral space kickboxing match with Volkanovski. I don't think he can really win a decision against him.
Yeah.
He's far more likely to finish him, Volkanovski has been, he's been dropped by he was dropped by Holloway twice. He was dropped by Mendez as well, I believe. Mm-hmm. He's clearly very tough and very, his just insane sense of calm, and I think helps him out.
Very poised and also exceedingly well conditioned, which definitely plays a factor in recoverability, which he has shown in spades. He's been hurt, but he has never been close to finished in the UFC.
Yes, Ortega is a massive puncher and also a huge submission threat, which is also not really something that we've seen Volkanovski fight.
Right. But Volkanovski's way quicker.
Yeah,
he just is.
It's what it comes down to.
And there's some parallels between Volkanovski as an opponent and Korean Zombie. Skilled counterpuncher. Well, that's mostly it. How different might that fight have been if Korean Zombie had, say, fainted?
Yeah,
which he did almost none of. Despite his he's just like a dead shot counterpuncher, where he's very instinctive with his timing and his distance, and doesn't do a lot of feinting. In fact, I think he did a better job of it than we have ever seen before in that most recent fight against old, what's his name?
Dan Ige.
That was like a notable improvement in that realm. Volkanovski is like the UFC's best feinter. Again, he shut Jose Aldo down.
It's him and Adesanya, I think, but yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? I think he's even better. At least in the particular way that he will work off of whatever result he gets from his feints. Adesanya, we know, can be very frustrated when a counterpuncher just ignores his feints or just responds to them purely defensively, as Jan Blachowicz did, and waits for his actual leads to open themselves up and counter. Volkanovski will just chip away at you incessantly if you aren't biting on the feints. And he will barrel in and get into your chest and land shots over the top. He also has the takedown, which I really don't know how that shakes out in this particular matchup. I have no idea. All I know is that Ortega is a pretty dangerous clinch fighter. He's really good at finding shots on breaks. But I don't know that he's big and strong. He's not a great wrestler per se, but can Volkanovski just barrel in and take him down? I don't know. Is speed enough? Is flat-footedness enough to make that happen for him? And does it just put him in hot water? I feel like I haven't seen enough from either guy in that kind of fight to know.
Yeah. And, is Volkanovski someone who has to have all the parts of his game working, or at least needs to access parts of it to feel comfortable? Because Volkanovski was the one who really initiated the clinches and the, at least, takedown attempts against Holloway. What if he's up in a fight where that's tremendously ill-advised?
Yeah.
Does Volkanovski does seem like he's turned into a preternaturally skilled striker under, as we've watched his time in the UFC. Does he really want to have a 5-round purely striking match? Because we've never seen him do it without looking for the clinch as a safety valve or anything like that.
True. Nor have we seen it from Brian Ortega. I mean, a big narrative in the Korean Zombie fight was how well he worked off of failed takedowns. Mm-hmm. Again, he constantly just was a really interesting use of his reach that was very effective. He just constantly pawed and picked at Korean Zombie's lead leg with his own lead hand. This was from a southpaw stance. Frequently just picked his knee up, like a half-hearted knee pick just to upset his balance, and found a lot of strikes off of that. And when he actually engaged in a takedown attempt, found even better strikes on the breaks. Which again, I could see his elbows in particular being very effective against the shorter Volkanovski in those kinds of situations. But I don't know if that'll work against a tiny, stocky, powerful wrestler, the way it did against Korean Zombie.
Yes, and also, as we said again, a much quicker person than Korean Zombie.
Yes.
His leg will not just be there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is important. I think physicality plays a role here, a big one. I also just think that I expect Volkanovski to take whatever targets are given to him, something he's very good at. And I don't think that Brian Ortega, as improved as his defense looked against Korean Zombie, I think it breaks down in layers. And whether you can get him to respond defensively with a feint or an initial attack, or you can just use sheer variety to pick at one opening after another. It's something you'll hear Volkanovski's corner shouting. I believe I know what this cue means, but they'll just yell targets. And I think that means, hit whatever's open. Whenever you hear his corner shout that, it would be like, oh, he'll hit a leg kick, then he'll hit a body shot. He'll make less obvious choices. Or at least he'll stop swinging purely at the head when his corner is calling targets. It's a big emphasis. And that more than anything, I think his willingness to see the entire body of his opponent and take whatever openings they're giving him, that forward thinking sort of nature that Volkanovski has won him many fights so far, and I expect will win him this fight as well.
Yep, I tend to agree. I mean, there's things to be. I think just in the general way that it works, I think Ortega's shown some impressive improvements. I don't really expect those improvements to actually play terribly well against Alexander Volkanovski. I think what keeps him a live dog and a real threat in this fight is basically the stuff that he brought into the Holloway fight. I think there are still reasons to be concerned for Volkanovski. Mm-hmm. He's clearly not, or at least hasn't shown himself to be a finisher at the championship level. Mm-hmm. He leaves, nor is he someone who's just going to compromise people beyond the fight, but beyond the point where they can actually fight back, like say Holloway can. He's definitely going to leave, and he's probably going to leave an opportunistic Ortega in there for 5 rounds.
Yep.
There's the worry of Volkanovski's protracted case with a case of COVID.
Oh yeah. Could that have affected that famous conditioning? Could be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a video making the rounds on Twitter of him at the end of some insane wrestling practice, where he just, it was just take down fresh people over and over and over again. Yeah. And it was like, here's the last 30 seconds of him doing that. And, predictably, there are a bunch of people online being like, why are you doing takedowns? Brian Ortega, guillotine.
It's a limit-pushing drill.
Yes, it's for conditioning, so that he can still wrestle and grapple when he is tired.
Yeah.
And yeah, that looked absolutely disgusting. If he can do that, I still have confidence in his cardio and that he hasn't actually been compromised by COVID. So yeah, I mean, I like Volkanovski. I think Ortega is a very dangerous threat in quite specific ways, but I can't see him winning a decision, and I think Volkanovski is going to, at the very least, pick up the first round and probably the second as well, and can probably coast to a win, even if he gets put in trouble at some point.
Yeah, I'd be happy to see it. I mean, I never liked Brian Ortega so much as that Korean Zombie fight. I love seeing fighters make huge developments, and the fact that it was so many MMA fighters' developments, I need to get stronger, I need to cut more weight. It was a technical and skill-specific development, which, being an insufferable nerd, I love more than anything else. And I would love to see him unveil yet more great boxing skills and make this a really difficult fight. And he's Brian Ortega, so like you said, he could win even if it doesn't go well. But
that was his main way of winning things.
That was his whole MO. But yeah, I tend to agree with all of that. And Volkanovski is the pick to retain the title once again. Let's hope it's a controversial decision that people refuse to get over for years and years. Ooh, fingers crossed.
I'm hoping for that from Usyk Joshua.
Oh, that's a good one. You want the hottest possible controversy. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I'm up for that. All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, unfortunately, we have to discuss Valentina Shevchenko versus Lauren Murphy. Should be a relatively easy one to break down in comparison. After that, Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler, and then whatever else we have time for from this stacked UFC 266 card. All of that and more after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Who did Lauren Murphy beat last time? Joanne Calderwood. Split decision. Did I score that fight for her? I honestly can't remember.
It was very close. As many Lauren Murphy fights are.
Yeah.
I think we'll go. I think we'll go ahead and make that our the first sound you'll hear of segment 2. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about the co-main event, another flyweight title defense of Valentina Shevchenko. This time she's taken on Lauren Murphy, who just elicited that dreadful yawn from Phil McKenzie. I like Lauren Murphy, Phil. I'm offended on her behalf.
No, you're not.
Well, I am a little. Don't tell me how I feel. Fuck you. What do you mean?
I also like Lauren Murphy.
Uh-huh. No, you don't.
I just don't like her enough to want to watch her fight Valentina Shevchenko. Or more than that, my expectations have been changed over time.
Uh-huh.
By years of watching MMA. I mean, I was never exactly like this anyway, but I remember when, like, Dan Hardy fought GSP, and one of my friends was super engaged in the fight.
Yeah.
And there, there's this sort of thrill of the underdog. He's like, I really like Dan Hardy. He's a British fighter, and I hope he wins. I don't really hope he wins. I don't care. Because he just shouldn't. It would be stupid if he won. I like him.
You're telling me your reaction to Lauren Murphy winning would be, that's stupid.
It would be a little bit stupid.
No, run it back. Redo it. Come on, it would be awesome. If Lauren Murphy, like 37-year-old mom Lauren Murphy.
I believe she's actually 38.
38-year-old mom Lauren Murphy beat psycho gun nut Valentina Shevchenko, reigning most dominant champion in the entire UFC, that wouldn't be satisfying to you? You're a madman.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be. But also, there'd just be a big part of me that's just like, that doesn't seem probabilistically likely.
No, that I certainly agree with.
Like, it wouldn't be like something anyone could have seen coming, or it would just seem totally random. It would have to be Valentina Shevchenko falling off a completely bizarre cliff.
Yeah.
Or Lauren Murphy landing the punch of her life. Are we spoiling our picks here? This is what I'm worrying.
I think we may be. It wouldn't be like Home Rousey. It would be like GSP Sarah. We're like, well, lucky win, man. That won't happen the second time.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, it is in a way kind of sadder, because you're like, oh, now she has to rematch her. They have to invalidate this wonderful experience. What Lauren Murphy should do is win the title and retire instantly. So they can never take it away from her that way.
Cosign. Or she should try and, she should just do like the Bisping thing, where she
She waits out for
fights the easiest possible matchup from of like an old person with a name.
Yeah.
And then someone from the weight class below.
People have been clamoring for that rematch between Lauren Murphy and Roxy Modafferi.
Hell yes. That's what I'm talking about.
Do that for the title
shot.
Yep. Valentina Shevchenko's got to earn a title shot. She wants to come back. Unfortunately, I know we wouldn't hear those kinds of things from Lauren Murphy. She's too likable. You know, she's a straightforward, honest, humble person. So she'd be like, yeah, I'll fight whoever. Anyway, we spoiled our picks. It's kind of impossible not to do with the Valentina Shevchenko title fight. Are there any of the slightly new wrinkles we saw, in Shevchenko's last 2 fights that, would inform Lauren Murphy's chances here? She's, you know, she's super durable. She's stocky and pretty physically strong, although, probably even slower than Jennifer Maia. But she will barrel in and grab onto people and mash them against the cage. And Jennifer Maia also did find some success with like pressure counter striking, which Murphy is, I'm happy to say, not bad at. She will pick up on openings, particularly with her left hook. She's got a really nice left hook. It's probably the best single thing she does in the cage. It is often the round-winning tool in these very close fights she tends to have. Are there any opportunities, or is she just way, way too slow?
I mean, she's way, way too slow. But, I think, I mean, the main things are, I think, what we're learning about Valentina Shevchenko is that there isn't really a striker who's going to take her out in the UFC. I think this was the question in the sort of answered in the Andrade and Maia fights, is that what was it better to be? A moderately okay, you know, you need to be a physical force. Okay, this is a given. Is it good to be a physical force who is a aggressive and bad striker?
Yeah.
But a decent wrestler, or is it good to be a physical force who's a poor wrestler and an okay striker? And as it turned out, like, the wrestling is where it's at. I think Juliana Pena showed us that back in the day. Joanna Jędrzejczyk has showed us this. You are not winning a striking-only fight with Valentina Shevchenko, in part because she's going to take you down.
She'll go to the wrestling. Yeah, you have to be able to. You have to be able to beat that crucial turning point of her own takedown game, which can be done. You know, we've that Maia fight was not the first time we've seen Shevchenko have just like a moment of kind of staggeringly poor takedown defense. So yeah, I agree. It's either you try to strike her and she takes you down when she needs to, or you like take her down and she's out striking you the whole time that isn't happening. And I don't think Murphy's a good enough wrestler. I think she's in fact a significantly better striker.
Yep.
You know, she's slow, but she has an idea of how to connect her strikes and how to, come back on the third beat of an exchange and recounter an opponent. And she can pile on into the clinch, but from there, she's just not really a good wrestler. So, how boring is Shevchenko going to make it, I suppose, is the question to ask before we move on. Is Lauren Murphy going to be so doggedly determined to hit her with strikes that she only wrestles her? Or, cause I don't think there's an insubstantial chance that she truly is like the slowest, most hittable woman Shevchenko has fought since maybe Priscilla Cachoeira. And while Shevchenko did famously betray all of her fans by wrestling Cachoeira in that fight, she might just like head kick her. It's going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real problem. Everything's going to be there.
Yeah.
Counterpunches will be there. The kicks from range will be there. The takedowns will I think Lauren Murphy is an underrated defensive wrestler at this point in her career. I think when was the last time she actually gave up takedowns? Ciara Eubanks took her down.
Yeah.
And then kept her down for an entire round. So that's not a good sign. Okay, no, take it back. She's just getting out there like Shevchenko wherever she wants it, but not enough to get a finish or do anything particularly exciting.
Yeah. I would, I do think there's a chance Lauren Murphy, if she can survive and keep pressure on, has some success on the feet. She's just like an unremarkably but determined and capable boxer. Puts together some nice...
Will she have more or less success on the feet than Joanna Jędrzejczyk?
I'm gonna say less. I'm gonna say less.
Yeah. No, you're right. It would be cool. I mean, if she won, in part because it would be hilariously funny.
Come on.
Yeah, no, you're right. I was thinking of this from an inspirational perspective or an analytical perspective, but I think it's, as with all things in MMA, you got to think of it from the perspective of how funny would this be.
Yes, think of it from the perspective of a
Dana
troll.
White having to put the belt around Lauren Murphy. Fucking love it.
Oh my god, can you imagine the response from... Yeah. You thought Piotr Jan's fans were upset.
Oh my god, yeah, that would be beautiful. Don't make me care about this fight, Connor. I don't want to.
Okay, all right. It's not going to happen. So yeah. And the more you think that, the better it'll feel if it does. So just convince yourself it's not going to happen, which I am pretty damn well convinced it's not going to happen. Yep, too physical, too quick, too able to take the fight wherever she needs to keep it safe and controlled, and boring. So Valentina Shevchenko by however she wants it, which probably means a decision.
That is how she wants it.
That is absolutely how she wants it. Okay. I think we take a break. Short segment 2, but that's fine. We'll have plenty of time when we come back to discuss the other stuff from this card, of which there is plenty. We may, in fact, end up discussing more than we can fit on this episode and end up chopping it together with the sort of Romero Davis chat we did before the show started into an extra long bonus episode for you guys. But that means, at the very least, Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler, too. And I don't know what else. We got Curtis Blades versus Jairzinho Rosenstruik, which sounds potentially awful. Jessica Andrade versus Cynthia Calvillo. Curious to see how Andrade looks in her second fight at women's flyweight. Marla Moraes versus Merab Dvalishvili. Even Shamil Abdurakhimov versus Chris Daukaus is pretty interesting to me as far as heavyweight fights go. So all of those are options, but definitely Diaz versus Lawler too after this break. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking about a rematch. In fact, I saw this. I think it was Nick Baldwin on Twitter. A rematch 209 months in the making. Robbie Lawler versus Nick Diaz 1 happened 209 months ago. And now we're here for the rematch. Nick Diaz has not won a fight in a decade. He hasn't fought at all it's been at least 5 years. Let's see. When was his last fight? It was
Anderson Silva, right?
Yep, Anderson Silva. It was in 2015. January of 2015. So it was more than 6 years ago. 6.5 years ago. Yep. It's weird. But, to be honest, first of all, it feels perfectly in line with the glut of, old man freak show fights we're getting outside the UFC. I think yeah.
That is the weird thing about it, is it doesn't quite feel like a UFC fight.
No. It feels like something that would happen in Bellator after both these guys get cut.
Yep.
But, I think the UFC has their thumb on the pulse in that regard because MMA fans have been enjoying the nostalgia fights, of which this is definitely one. By the way, I'm watching the footage right now of Diaz Lawler 1, and I just want to say, the ring girls apparently used to hold up the ring card, the round number card, and just shake their tits while they were doing that. Bring that back, I forget what Fedor and Khabib say. More just gratuitous sexuality from the ring card girls. Thank you very much. But it's kind of interesting and I kind of like it. Like, I'm an MMA fan. I enjoy the nostalgia fights for what they're worth. And, this is, I kind of like the idea of a Legends fight where, like, I don't want to see, I'm not you, Phil. I don't want to see Robbie Lawler get chewed up by, like,
Michel Pereira.
That sounds awful. I do not want to see that. Nor do I want to see Nick Diaz fight at all, unless it's against, a pretty shot and faded looking Robbie Lawler. I hope that this is like a fight where the two guys can kind of, be on the same level or a similar enough level that they can kind of just have a degraded version of their previous fight. Like Shogun, Little Nog 3.
Oh, yeah.
Which was way better than it had any right to be because they were just an essentially good style matchup and they had diminished at similar rates. And so they were just as competitive. It was like, oh, this is two old men fighting, but it's two old men who know how to fight. And that's how it felt. No one was getting mopped by the other. I'm hoping for that here. I don't have very high hopes because, again, it's been so long since Nick Diaz has even fought. But, yeah.
Yeah, so here's another hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since Diaz has fought, and Lawler's been out for a while. What was the last fight from either of these guys that you would class as fun? Like a good fight to watch. I can answer the question. It is BJ Penn, Nick Diaz, and it is, which must be 10 years ago. I think it's Diaz's last win. And it is also Robbie Lawler's last win, which is Donald Cerrone back in 2017.
Yeah, and even that did feature a round of Robbie Lawler doing nothing. Look,
yep.
I think Nick Diaz, Carlos Condit is a fun fight.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's fine. We've rewatched it. I think we did it for the Depressed Us. Not a bad fight at all. MMA fans at the time were not at all in a place where they could appreciate, like, a close fight that wasn't just a brawl. So I think it's fine. It's not the greatest fight you'll ever see by a long stretch, but it's certainly not bad. So that adds, that was half a year after Diaz Penn. So there. It wasn't that long ago, actually. It was actually only in 2012. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. These guys match up in an essentially good way. I'm going to say something here that you'll probably hear me say on the Romero Davis episode and in an article this week if I manage to finish it. Nick Diaz really was, like Anderson Silva, I have really come to appreciate what Nick Diaz was at his time in the sport. He was way ahead of his time. I'm going to say something potentially controversial, especially to any of the more sensitive fight site boys who may be listening to this right now, and that is all of them. They're all teenagers. In a fight like Diaz-Gomi, you can see a sort of a distant echo of a fight like Holloway-Aldo.
Mm-hmm.
Nick Diaz, as a pace fighter who would use his reach, who took power off his shots, you can't really overstate how unusual that was at the time. Everyone at MMA was like, this is literally the era, right smack in the middle of that era when Boss Rutan was out there being patted on the back for telling MMA fighters jabs don't work because they're not powerful enough. That was the level of understanding of boxing possessed by most MMA fighters. And Nick Diaz was out here throwing 0 power punches, just poking people like Jake Shields if he knew how to use it. Just bap, 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 endless pitter-patter, pelting, frustrating punches. And it excelled against fighters like Robbie Lawler. And I think this fight could be an interesting opportunity to ask, how much better did Robbie Lawler get? Or the age-old question, are bad style matchups always bad style matchups?
So yeah, my main question is Nick Diaz, I mean, forget physically because he's been out for so long.
Right.
Is Nick Diaz mentally able to fight anymore?
That is also a good question.
Because, I mean, I think Robbie Lawler has looked bad in his latest fights. This is not to be...
But he seems personality-wise like Robbie Lawler.
Yeah, but they're also like very Robbie Lawler ways of losing fights. They're just expanded. Nick Diaz has looked awful in his latest fights.
Oh, in the fights.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he's looked awful in the interim as well, but the various Instagram things coming through of him just being drunk off his face or saying mad stuff. None of this inspires confidence, but it's just the fact that like that Anderson Silva fight in particular, Diaz he looked terrified. He looked like the anxiety which he's always carried into the cage was just eating him alive.
Yeah, but let me ask you this question. At what point in Nick Diaz's career would he have won that fight or even looked markedly better? That's a nightmare matchup for a guy like Nick Diaz.
Against old Anderson Silva, I would have expected him to he would have at least gone after him in some significant way in the past, instead of just trailing him around the cage looking like striking poses so that he didn't get humiliated too badly.
Who did he ever do that against who's remotely like Anderson Silva? A guy who excels at like posturing and neutralizing and controlling the pace and number of engagements. I don't know. Like I get it, but like I think Nick Diaz is uniquely suited to face guys like Robbie Lawler, like KJ
I think
Noons.
he was. I think he was. I am unconvinced as to whether he is now.
No, that's certainly fair. I'm just questioning whether the Anderson Silva fight is a meaningful indicator of that. Because
I mean, it's just that he looked shook. Like that's the stuff. All the things of him like twerking and lying on the floor were like very, very obviously him trying to be like, you can't make me look stupid.
Yeah, but
if I make myself look stupid. But he was terrified.
But the only reason that normally doesn't give you that impression is that most MMA fighters, like notably young Robbie Lawler, are macho and get mad and start making mistakes because of it. I don't think that's fundamentally different from Nick Diaz's many taunts in the past. I just think he felt he had to keep elevating the taunts because Silva wasn't giving him what he wanted.
Because he had to elevate the taunts because he was terrified of getting memed, and he knew that he probably would be, that he was going to lose. The last thing someone as anxious as Nick Diaz wanted was to be on the receiving end of some Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner style humiliation KO.
That is certainly true.
And he looked shook. Yeah. And it's the fact that, if you look at his strikes landed per fight, admittedly they go from, they're very different kinds of people. Admittedly he was absolutely chewing BJ Penn up, but 178 against BJ Penn, 105 against Carlos Condit, 41 against George St. Pierre, and 77 against Anderson Silva. And bear in mind the BJ Penn fight was 3 rounds, and all the others were 5. So I mean, I think what I'm getting at is one basic thing. I've said it about Robbie Lawler before. Robbie Lawler's tendency to have moments of berserker fury mixed with huge periods of not doing anything, particularly later in his career, but mean that anyone who hits a metronomically high pace is generally bad news for him. Yeah. Anyone who just goes strike, 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 something's happening, duck, 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 just like this. It's always hard for Robbie Lawler, always, almost no matter what kind of fight they are, whether they're it's a wrestling approach like Shields or Miller, or whether it's a striking approach or a mix of the two.
Right? Yeah, careless pace, and that is the picture.
Monotonous pace.
Yeah, and that is the picture of a prime Nick Diaz. Your question is, can Nick Diaz do it anymore?
Yeah, my question is Nick Diaz going to be like, because all the other thing, we've heard from both of these guys in the run up to this fight, and they both sound very mature and grown up, and like I just find myself thinking, does this favor Nick Diaz at all? For them both to be, for Robbie Lawler to be, a calm person who's like, oh, I'm not watching that much UFC lately because it's not appropriate for my kids. And Nick Diaz is like, I'm not going to taunt him this time because I want to look good I want to send a good impression for my students.
My baby brother, Nate, who's still a growing boy, he's still learning.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Who's he trying to be a role model for?
But in this case, if we get a sparring match type fight, I fully expect Robbie Lawler to win that. Nick Diaz has to walk through fire, and he has to do that. He has to just be like punch, 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 and then Robbie Lawler will, you just have to get Robbie Lawler having to claw his way out of his own periods of inactivity, because that was when he got clobbered last time.
Yep.
And I don't trust he can do that anymore. He hasn't done that for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's that is the interesting question is, does the passivity of Robbie Lawler get an Anderson Silva response? Or are there enough different variables? Robbie Lawler smaller than Anderson Silva. Nick Diaz will have that reach advantage that he was always so comfortable having. Robbie Lawler, I mean, he's beaten him before. That's got to be, I guess it could be. It's tough to say. Is that a salve for Nick Diaz's infamous anxiety, or is it more pressure? I don't know.
He hasn't had many rematches apart from Dunes.
Yeah, which he did great in.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It feels like you cannot pick Nick Diaz, and for that reason, I'm going to do it.
That's fair enough.
This is completely wishful thinking, but supposing the very long odds, the very unlikely chance that Nick Diaz looks as much like classic Nick Diaz as Robbie Lawler currently does like classic Robbie Lawler, that the style matchup is unchanged. And I think Robbie Lawler is sort of the picture of a guy, the very image of the fighter that Nick Diaz was designed to beat. And he has certainly developed. He's got way better defense than he used to. He's way more patient than he used to be. And that could be a real problem if Nick just can't open him up. But, essentially, he's a pretty low output power counterpuncher. And, Nick is at his best a relentless, monotonous pace fighter. And I'm willing enough to believe that there are other factors in those last three fights that explain the low output. Carlos Condit, not even a particularly low output from Nick, but very, very evasive, famously evasive. George St. Pierre, I think if you looked at the stats throughout Nick Diaz's career, you would see that pretty consistently his lowest outputs came against wrestlers. He would shut down his own striking in order to shore up his takedown defense. And then Anderson Silva, I just think Nick Diaz has never fought anyone like Anderson Silva. Not to mention the fact that he was a big middleweight. So I'm willing to believe that Nick Diaz can, but I'm not. I'm also, I'm lying to myself.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair enough. Robbie Lawler has looked, pretty bad.
Yeah,
let's not kid ourselves. He's losing fights that you can see. You could see, like versions of Robbie Lawler losing. Like I'm 100%. I think RDA would be any version of Robbie Lawler. I think, unfortunately, Colby Covington probably would as well.
Mm-hmm.
Neil Magny, I think would give him a lot of trouble in most of his iterations. I think there's just a solid chance that Lawler would put him away at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, you can't say, like, he also just hasn't looked good and he hasn't done very much. He's also looking like he's having trouble pulling the trigger.
Yeah.
So there's so many advantages that I think he does carry into this fight. Should they have a slower paced fight, he's just the harder hitter. He can kick. He could even wrestle if he wants to be particularly like old man savvy about it.
His last fight was recent enough that he can probably remember it.
Yep.
I mean, he's not been active, but he's certainly been a lot more active than Nick.
He's also, Nick has had time to get over all the problems of being on a big losing streak.
True.
Nick is probably, even though he's going to be anxious going in there, he's at least not going to be thinking like, man, it was a long time. I've been losing a lot of fights lately.
Yeah. I would like to think that he's
Nick was he wasn't the first guy, but he was the most famous guy to really like put an end to the first Robbie Lawler hype train.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still think I'm gonna pick Lawler. I mean, he's just
perfect sense.
He's bigger and more physical now. And yeah, if they have just like a slow paced sparring match, I just think Lawler just hits hard. I think I don't trust Diaz to keep the pace that he needs.
Mm-hmm. I feel like because this is a nostalgia fight, I'd be perfectly happy with a slow paced sparring match.
Yeah, to be honest, I'd be fine if they were like, we're not going to kill each other.
Yeah, it's like Anderson
totally happy
Adesanya.
with it.
It's like Anderson Adesanya. Like some people out there were like bummed because it wasn't a fucking brawl, which really questions how much you really are a fan of either of these guys in the first place. But for me, it was like, oh, that could have been way worse. I could have felt really bad watching this experience, and I don't. Which okay.
Like Lawler Cerrone.
What about Lawler Cerrone?
Just like a good fight.
Oh yeah,
like a good competitive fight between two guys which matched up.
Yeah.
Pretty well, and at the end of it, you're like, oh yeah, neither of them had to look like, neither of them had to get splattered into paste.
Yeah. That is all for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Thank you so much for tuning in. What a pleasure it is, Phil, to just have such good fights to talk about. It really makes all the difference in the world. And if you want to hear us discuss even more good fights, you should go back and check out you should head over to our Patreon and check out the bonus episode that will probably be dropping right around the same time as this main show episode. We discussed not only Romero versus Davis, a sort of weird and frustrating, but I thought very interesting and informative fight, but also many other fights from the UFC 266 undercard, of which I think you only heard 3 on this episode. So, Phil, you've got nothing to plug, do you?
No, I do. I was on Crooklyn's Corner.
Oh, yeah, so was I a week ago. I forgot to mention it.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, but I'm more important, so
That's
people
true.
should listen to my episode.
Yeah.
So Crooklyn has been doing a series of like interviews with fight analysts, and yeah, I was on that as Connor was before. So, and it was a lot of fun. And yeah, check it out if you're interested in hearing me ramble about other things in my life. Also, Connor, you have to pick Usyk Joshua, you coward, before the weekend's fight.
I have to pick it right now with just no...
You have to pick it now. Pick it. Who's going to win?
Zero research.
Pick it.
Usyk.
Yeah. No, I'm going to pick Anthony Joshua by a decision which outrages everyone on the internet, but which probably wasn't actually all that bad, just because this seems to be the funniest kind of boxing decision.
Yes.
These are the best kinds.
And if that's what you like, you have ample opportunities to enjoy them. There's a lot of those decisions in boxing. No one's ever happy with a decision. Ever.
I can't believe this. I mean, but it would be so much worse this time. Like, just look at how poorly configured everyone is for any kind of controversy. I mean, particularly all the nerds who are just like, Usyk's going to win because he doesn't have feet which are made of concrete and he seems to enjoy boxing.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. Anthony Joshua's big and English.
Yeah,
might be more.
No, I don't really expect Anthony Joshua to win, but it would be very funny if he did, especially if it was by a remotely controversial decision.
And it wouldn't even, like Anthony Joshua is one of those guys. I'm happy to see him win. He seems like a great guy.
Yeah, he seems like he just seems like he's got his head screwed on right, and he tries. You can't say he doesn't try. Yeah. You can't say that he's
a very earnest guy. He's like he's like boxing's GSP of the moment, like this hyper athlete, well loved by every single person in his home country, and he's so celebrated, such the valedictorian that you want to hate him, but you can't really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And and he's for a modern boxer, he fought pretty decent competition.
Oh, absolutely.
Obviously, I do genuinely expect Usyk to beat him, but it'll be funny if Joshua wins.
All right, well, we will try next week to discuss that one more in depth. Maybe, actually, since we've locked down Ryan Wagner of the Fight Site to appear next week to discuss Holloway Ortega, we can probably rope him into a discussion of Joshua Usyk as well. So for a more considered, more technical, more analytical take on that fight after the fact, make sure you tune in next week. It may not be on the main episode, although it may. It might also show up on our Patreon, where, again, you can hear a bunch of other fights from this week. And, other stuff besides. It's $3 a month, people. Come on. Thanks for listening. Find us on Twitter, @EvilGregJackson. That's Phil, @BoxingBush, BUSCH. That's me. And we will talk to you next week. Ryan Wagner is going to be with us. Very excited to discuss fights like Joshua Usyk and Volkanovski Ortega in retrospect. And 209 never die.